I'm all in.
Yeah.
19. So, let's try this again, shall we? Just cruising down to the pub tonight for the game. This is the Wednesday night game, and it's the bounty, so $40 entry. Let's see if we can clean up some bounties and take it down. The first hand that we look down at in the big blind, we're about 20 minutes into the game. We have 10-2 suited, under the gun folds. Early position calls, small blind calls, and I check just to see a flop. Flop comes out and we have 10-5-8. I hit top pair on the board. Small blind checks, I check, as even though I have top pair, my kicker is the worst. The early position checks, and we see a turn, which brings the second diamond and a potential straight draw, especially from the small blinds range. I decided at this point to lead out because I do have top pair with the backdoor flush. Both the players call, and the river comes the 4 of spades. That's the name of the thing. With the board now pairing and the straight and the flush draw missing, I think my 10 is good enough sometimes, so I bet 600 just to get a little bit of value if I can. At this point I do get raised by the small blind, which is a little bit worrisome, but for the amount that's in the pot, for an extra 600, I think it's worth the call. I do call and I get shown 6-4 offsuit, so turned pair, rivered trips. Sick. On reflection, it's always a value raise in that position. I should have been able to make a disciplined fold at that point, but the blinds were small, stacks were deep, who cares? Next hand we look at, I'm under the gun +1. I decide to raise to try and force some action to 800, 4 times the blinds with Jack Queen offsuit, maybe steal the blinds. This does not go down too well as I get 3 callers. Not ideal, but let's see a flop. And bang, what a flop. It's 2 Jack Jack with 2 hearts. So I flop trips and a backdoor flush draw just in case. Pretty decent flop when you're trying to make a move. The blinds check, I lead out again for 800 to make it look like a C-bet with an overpair or overcards to the jacks, because I wouldn't lead out here with the jack, would I? Middle position and small blind folds. Big blind calls and we see a turn, which is the 8 of diamonds. So my potential flush draw misses and now opens up the straights to be live, but not too worried about that yet. Big blind checks the turn and I bet 1600. The big blind folds and I just show Queen of Hearts.
Warning. The following hand contains footage of a serious bad beat. It contains graphic content and some wildly loose play that some may find offensive. Viewer discretion is advised.
Right, here we go. I'm in the small blind with 6-7 offsuit. Middle position calls, cutoff calls, and I call for 100 more. Big blind also checks. The flop comes and it's an 8-10-7 rainbow. Obviously I hit bottom pair and there is a straight draw, which is pretty decent for my exact holding and would be relatively disguised if it does come in. This checks around and we see a turn, which is the 4 of clubs. If I thought I was good on the flop, 4 doesn't scare me too much, so I think I'm still good here. So I decide to lead out for 200. The big blind calls. Middle position at this point raises to 600, and like I said, I'm still drawing to a straight and with trips and 2 pairs as backup options, so I'm not too worried. So I'll just call to see the river. The big blind also calls. River comes out and it's the 9 of hearts, so I hit my straight and there's no flush draw out there, which is pretty decent. I check to middle position to try and get them to put more chips into the pot, but the big blind donk leads for 1100. Middle position calls and I check raise to 22 to try and get more value out of the straight. Big blind calls also with a 6 for the straight, and then the middle position side calls. Turns out he has pocket 10s. So he flopped a set and got run down by 2 straights on the river. Sick. We're in position on this hand and the blinds are up. We have ace jack offsuit. We have 1 limper, so I raise 3x to 1200. The small blind and big blind and the limper calls. And we see a flop, which is ace 7-4 with 2 clubs. Checks around to me and I put a $2,000 C-bet out there. It's just under half pot. I'm concerned about any flush draws. The small blind folds, the big blind calls, and the limper folds. Turn pairs the 4 and brings in a second flush draw. Big blind checks and I check back. The river brings in the front door flush with the 8 of clubs. However, the small blind checks and I check back, hoping 2 pair with a jack kicker plays, and it does. The villain holds ace 5. Probably could have let out out with a small bet, 2 to 3,000, and got a call. But with so much out there potentially beating me, and maybe a slow playing better ace, better kicker, 2 pair even, I'm happy to check and win. We look down at ace jack offsuit. Ah shit, I've used the same footage again. Wait a minute, no I haven't. This time we're under the gun and we are 5-handed at this stage. I raise to 1800, 3x the blinds, middle position call. The button decides to 3-bet to 6,500. I feel that this player would be trying to do this on the button and try and steal the blinds plus my raise, and could potentially be doing that with any suited connectors, 8-9, 9-10, or any suited wheel ace, or mid to low pockets, 5 to 8s. I decided my hand was too good to fold to a 3-bet, but wasn't that confident of 4-betting at this spot. The blinds fold, and we're heads up. The flop comes queen, 9, jack, rainbow. I hit middle pair, so I feel my best course of action is to c-bet as the initial raiser, so I lead out for 11,000. On a fairly straighty board, I think if I check to the button, he will try and bet me off, and I'm not sure what to do when he does that. The board does hit my range quite well. I could be here with king 10, try and get a queen or a jack to call a bet, but it doesn't matter. The button folds and it gets through. The button again this hand, there's 1 limper, and I over limp with a fairly weak ace. Try and see a cheap flop, hopefully. And the small blind and big blind oblige. See the flop and it comes out 9 of hearts, jack of diamonds, 6 of hearts. So we have 1 over and a backdoor flush and straight options. So I'd be pretty happy to see another card. Small blind checks and the big blind bets 600. The limper calls this. I think at this point it's probably a middle pair or a straight draw that's putting this bet out. So for that price I'm happy to come along. And the small blind also calls. The turn is the 10 of hearts, which is a brilliant card for my hand, but there are now hands that I am concerned about. Checks around this time and the river is the 4 of hearts, completing the 4-card flush, and the straight is now counterfeit. Small blind leads out for 600, the big blind calls, the limper folds, and I reluctantly call as I'm probably beat at this point, but the pot ratio is too good for me not to call. But luckily on my part it was a good call, as the small blind shows a jack, leads top pair, and big blind announced a heart, but it's a 7 high, so my 8 of hearts takes it down. The limper also announced that they folded the straight on the river due to the heart. Good fold. Next hand we're in the big blind with the jack 10 off. Under the gun folds, the middle position calls, and the button raises to 2,800. The small blind folds. I've seen this player attack limp pots to try and take down the blinds, so I decide my hand is strong enough to call and assess the flop. The middle position folds and we're heads up. Flop comes 9 of clubs, 6 of diamonds, 4 of clubs. I decide his action is on me first to donk lead to show strength on this flop, as realistically it hits my range a lot better than his. Again, as said before, if I check to him he'll bet and I'll have to fold, but if he's drawing to a straight or a flush, or even if he's hit bottom or middle pair, a pot size bet is hard to call, so he folds. After getting some bluffs through, I think it's time we have a pretty decent hand. So this time we have king 10 of hearts on the button. The cutoff raises to 3k. I decide to flat here, as I don't think the small or big blind are going to raise, and if they do, it is a relatively easy fold. But as expected, the blinds fold and we go to the flop. Flop is 6-2-7 with 2 hearts. Absolutely smashing board for my hand, and even better, it doesn't really hit the cutoff's range with a raise pre-flop. They do, however, lead out for 3.5k, which to me looks like an overpair, 9s, 10s, although less likely as I hold a 10 queens maybe, even 8-9 suited, hearts or otherwise. I call, as my hand is still pretty strong, has a lot of potential value. The turn brings a king, so any overpair other than aces, I'm good again, and I'm unlikely up against kings. Ace king exactly is the only holding that I'm now somewhat concerned about. The cutoff leads out for 6k here. I still think I'm ahead of the overpairs, but if set or better top pair or 2 pair, I want to get max value if I hit the flush. So I shove over the top. Cutoff says, I think you're shoving because you're weak, and I don't know what you have that beats me. All signs that I've made the right play here, because I may get the current best hand to fold or get a worse hand to call looking me up. After a little while they do fold, but I'm happy to take down the extra 12 odd k. Nice play. In the big blind again, and we have ace 5 of clubs. Under the gun folds, middle position raises to 16, plus 1 folds, the hijack folds, the cutoff calls, the button folds, small blind calls, and I call for 800 more to close the action and see a flop. And what a flop. 5-7-5, rainbow, just with the backdoor flush in case I need it. As first to act, I check as I want to get max value out of this, hoping someone's got a bit of something here and they can put some money in the pot. The initial raiser bets out 16, and the cutoff freaks out and and goes all in for about 23.5k. You love to see it. So the small blind folds, I snap shove all in over the top, and the middle position folds. The cutoff turns over 7-8 offsuit for a pretty weak 2 pair. My flop trips are way better, and thankfully they stay that way. So here we are under the gun, and we look down at king deuce offsuit. Not sure what I should do here in this position. Pre-flop, think it should be a fold, but hey, I'm no expert. So the next hand, after showing you something that I've never done before, folding pre-flop, I'm in middle position, the blinds have gone up a fair whack, and I have queen jack offsuit. There's one limper, and I decide to try and take the blinds and pay for my next hand and shove for 44k. The button calls for much less, about 9k, and the blinds and the limper fold. I take back the 35k and we flip the cards over. He called with 9-7 offsuit. Okay, buddy, sure. Flop comes 9 high, I need to hit either of my overs. Turns to 7, and I'm dead. And just to rub it in, the river's a 9. Well played, I guess. So don't really lose too much in that hand, but would have been nice to not lose 9k. Would have been happy with the fold there from the 9-7 off, but you know, donkey's got a donk. In the big blind again, we have Jack 4 of hearts. I only have about 26k behind after paying for the blinds and getting pretty short, only having around 7.5 big blinds at this point. The field's getting pretty thin with only a few people away from making final table. Action folds to the small blind who calls, and with my exact hand I'm happy to check and see the flop. And we get a pretty decent one. It comes in the form of 5-3 ace, 2 hearts. So a great flop for me, drawing to both the flush and the straight. Small blind checks, and I'm happy to check back and see the free turn. Turn, king of diamonds, doesn't help me any, but I'm still live to the same draws as I was before. Small blind checks again, and I see no reason to bet here, so I check back. River comes, the 2 of diamonds, drilling my straight, and I only lose to 6-4 here, which is possible from the small blind, but when it checks again, I put a small bet of 4k out to get a call from any ace or king. The small blind folds, and I take this small but crucial pot. So the very next hand, we're in the small blind with ace-jack offsuit. Pretty decent holding in that exact spot. And as mentioned, we have about less than 10 bigs at this point. Folds around to me, so I shove to take down the blinds. It gets through this time, and we live to see another hand. So there's been a few hands that we've lost and a few blinds that we've had to give up. Now the blinds are up, and I'm in the small blind with ace-jack suited. Again with the ace-jack. It's a nice hand. I think we're 1 away from making the final table, so the last 9. As mentioned, we're pretty short stacked, so we'd like to take as much of a stack to the final table as possible. Under the gun, flat calls, and it folds round to me, so I shove for my remaining 19k in total. The big blind next to me shoves for 14k, so under shoves. Pretty decent, as they could be doing that with any 2 cards at that point, and I still have chips behind if he wins. Likelihood is I might be good against him. And it's at this point that I'm expecting a heads up. The under the gun thinks about it before calling the extra 13k, before rolling over king 2, the very hand that I folded earlier because I thought it was trash. The big blind also rolls over ace-6 offsuit, so I have them both dominated. At the minute, the flop comes out and it's 9-4-5, looking pretty against everyone's hands. Turn is a queen, no help to anyone, and I just need to avoid a king or a 6, and I'm good. Oh, or a 2, and a 2 comes on the river, and king 2 takes me out.
It's 2 hits. No, it's
No?
king 2.
King 2!
What a pile of
Obviously, I got a little bit tilted in that last king 2 hand. Fortunately, I didn't smash my phone when I threw it. This session was full of bad beats, and I managed to get knocked out at the same time as another player, so I technically made final table without actually sitting at it. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my play in the hands this session. To see me actually make a final table, check out this video here. Be lucky.